Welcome to another episode of our podcast, MEND Stories of Healing and Courage.
Thank you to our listeners, to those who are either listening in audio or dialed into the video podcast. Today we're with Ken Roycroft, who is a science advisory board member for MEND. We'll get into a little bit of the story how we met and how I came across some of the work that he's doing. Ken has spent the better part of his life studying integrative and regenerative nutrition and medicine, how it relates, and is doing some pretty wonderful work now in the world of orthopedics. So Ken, thank you for joining the podcast. I want to kind of go back to your passion for nutrition, which you live and breathe. And I remember you telling me a story one time about kind of how you got into the space, and share that story with our listeners.
Yeah, thanks, Isaiah. My passion for nutrition started as a very young guy, actually. Fortunately, was not for that purpose, but the gentleman who owned the gym I was working out for sports in high school, of all things, in the 70s, sold me 7 bottles of supplements, just really to make money on me. I mean, it came out that he was selling them to everybody in the gym. But luckily, the guy went to the kind of the Bible of the day called the Nutritional Almanac and actually gave me some really good stuff. Now, unbeknownst to him, I had been dealing with chronic acne for about 3 years at that point, under the care of a really renowned dermatologist. I was on tetracycline for the full 3 years. It was just wreaking havoc on my digestive tract, etc. Really having a tough time with that. My skin was now burned off by a couple layers. It would crack at night in my pillow, and the skin would fall off. It was just really, I was like the pink person in photos. So it was really a devastating condition for such a young guy. And so the interesting thing is that when he sold me these supplements, I could feel something was changing. The pain in my face was going away. It didn't really hurt as bad. They weren't as inflamed. And in 1978, everyone said I was nuts. I mean, it was crazy because it was so early in the game. And so what happened was, you can't tell a guy with a high IQ who's also a street guy that you're wrong if you feel it. So I went to the dermatologist and asked her and told her, the precocious kid at 16 years old, I think we found a natural cure for my chronic acne. And she kind of bifocaled me and said, poo-pooed me and said, it won't interrupt your protocol, and gave me more prescriptions. I literally crunched it up and threw it in the toilet and walked out, and I said, there's something here and I believe, and I'm going to go find out. So I started seeking out mentors who could teach me anything I could learn. And so I found a health food store that was new in the area. They were really kind of helpful and smart and really knowledgeable. This couple who owned it. So I used to hang out there and just learn. And little by little, they'd find me over bookcase reading books. By the time I was 20 years old, I read just shy of 100 nutrition books. And they called me the kid. They bought me a stool. It's like a little dunce stool. They sat in the corner. And I would sit there when I wasn't working or in school. I would just read. And because I couldn't afford to buy the books, that was my source. And so, I never worked for him, and he still gave me credit to the day he died. I sold more stuff in his store than any other person ever to work there for over 30 years. Because I was so passionate of what it did for me. Then I helped my mom with her migraine headaches, and I became this like local, sought after guy who had this handle on it in the late 70s, early 80s. And so I was going to be a lawyer of all things. And a health club chain came in and opened up and kind of a new word. Name was New Wave. That's how aggressive it was in the 80s. Joe Weider had started taking off. I was maybe just a little early for that, but he was starting to take off in the bodybuilding area. But they were looking for a nutritionist who helped to work at a nutrition bar and help people with nutrition and guidance. And they tried to hire my mentor, Ralph, or his wife, Diane. And they said, there's only one person I'd hire in the whole south of Boston area, and it's the kid. He knows more than my wife and I combined because he's read every book in the store and we just reference them. Now we ask him.
Fantastic.
So I changed my career. I gave up jobs and everything. I started working for no money in a business that had no following in that point. And ironically, it was right across the street or around the corner from a Quincy Hospital, which was a medical residency program, and it was a bloodbath. Because they would come in and find this 20-year-old kid who knew about nutrition, and they came in acting like they knew about nutrition when all they took in medical school was one course in deficiencies. So we'd have these full-on debates about why nutrition, optimized nutrition was better than just this deficiency disease. And it really trained me for what I do now for MEND and what I've done my whole career. It got me ready. It was kind of like proving ground.
And as you know, Ken, medicine is finally starting to catch up, and we'll get into that. And part of what we try to do with this podcast is not only share, really inspiring stories of people that have gone through some sort of a health challenge and perhaps are in the middle of that or on the tail end of that. And we all get really inspired and motivated by hearing those stories. But what we also want to do on this podcast is to inform is to leverage the knowledge of people like yourself and other experts who are really at the forefront of studying this stuff to understand how it can impact and change our lives, really. One of the things that I was struck by when we first met in person, I recall the meeting to this day, was you were waiting for me outside on a veranda at a hotel. I don't remember the name of the hotel in LA. We had crossed paths through MEND, and I came out and met you. And I don't think I knew your age at the time, but you quickly told me, because you're not shy about talking about that. You're today how old?
I'll be 58 in March.
58 in March, and perhaps for our listeners, you can kind of see Ken on the camera, but in person, full of strength and vitality, and perhaps one of the healthier people I've met. So you took that knowledge, Ken, that you gained over the years, over the decades, really. And I want to kind of transition into what you're doing in the world of orthopedics today, and if you could kind of share with our listeners, that transition, and then we'll get into sort of, how you're applying nutrition as it relates to the outcomes of your patients in orthopedics and why that's so important. So how did you get into orthopedics?
Well, I got invited in, actually. I managed to carve out a career over that time. It was my passion. I found my life's work, so I stayed in it forever, even when it wasn't popular yet. And little by little, I kept developing a following and ended up doing in excess of, I think I stopped counting at 30,000 consultations in my career. So I had quite a following. And if you think of the folks who were pursuing it into the 80s and 90s, it was usually someone with resources and someone who was open, right? And so I've dealt with anything from rock stars to athletes to business leaders to anything you can imagine. And one of my great clients over the years, Dr. Ralph Venuto, who's now on our board at MEND, he actually came to my 50th birthday party, and he just wasn't looking right, honestly. And I was concerned for him. As you know, as after us working together, I really care about my people. It's really genuine. And so I said, literally, I whispered in his ear, "You don't look good, Ralph. See me Monday morning. We need to get on that." And so that's what I did. I have pictures to prove it. I can show you anytime on my phone. And his metabolic age at 69 years old, even though he's a fit, virile guy, he worked out regularly and all that stuff, he was about 47 years old under the hood based on how we assessed metabolic age through these medical tests you can do. And I was able to get his metabolic age down to 17 within 6 months by changing his nutrition program.
Can you explain that a little bit? What do you mean by metabolic age versus chronological age?
Well, there's some really great bioimpedance devices out there. One by Tanita that we used, and I used in my practice. Another one by InBody is another great one, but to use a couple of names. And they'll talk about things like your visceral fat, your body, your hydration or body water mass, your muscle mass, your bone density or bone mass. And the scale we used, it talked about what your real metabolic age was versus your chronological age.
Which is biological indicators of
exactly.
age versus, just the chronological.
Like how efficient your body is. I mean, how big are your bones for your age, how much muscle for your age, how fast the reading comes back, how low your body fat is, a whole series of assessments.
So going back to Dr. Venuto, he is chronologically approaching 70s or in his 70s.
He was 69 right? At the time. He was 47.
47.
Yeah, under the, metabolically. And we got him down to 17 in less than 6 months.
17 what?
17 years old metabolically.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So and doctors are interesting. You know this as we've been doing this a long time. But doctors love numbers and love data and love facts. And that was the light bulb. Now, that guy had been working with me for 20 years. We're really good friends, And it's interesting because that was the moment for him. His aha moment goes, "Oh my gosh, can you do this for patients?" And I basically smacked him because we're buddies. And I'm like, I could have done this the whole time for patients, but it's nice for you to ask me when I'm 50. So yes, I can. So he asked me to come in really and start looking at his patients to see if we can nutritionally optimize them around surgery or procedure or trauma. So initially it was just to come in and see. But within 3 weeks after the results we're already starting to have with the patient feedback, he offered me a full-time position, and that's how I got into orthopedics.
Fantastic. So thank you. So that's a good segue into what I'd love to talk about next is, we know, you and I know, we've been at this for a while as it relates to MEND and our mission, but nutrition is very, very critical, perhaps the most, I'll say, modifiable factor, perhaps the factor that we control the most as it relates to injury, trauma, and healing, whether it's, bone fracture that you've had, and that's why I started MEND. I had a stress fracture that's very slow to heal, or you've just gone into a major surgery. There are not a lot of variables that you can control, but nutrition is one of them. And what we've learned through science is that it is, in fact, a very critical part of healing. Can you just kind of talk about what the body's needs are during a state of trauma and what that means as it relates to nutrition?
Absolutely. And so if you think of any type of stress in the body, any stress, but especially trauma like surgery or injury or some sort of major impact or interruption to the health of the body, it demands more resources. If you think of it like a car or a home or anything structural, if you go through a devastating, episode to your car, or like an accident or a house, like a tree falling on it, you need more resources to get it back to full function. And full resources you can look at as building blocks. And what are the building blocks of the human body? It's a supportive organic or matter that we take in to make ourselves come back from this trauma. So it's like someone on a raft who gets stuck out to sea. If they come back and eat the way they were out to sea, they stay the way they were out to sea. But if they come back and really live to their best self and eat as much as they can and start taking nutrition, they can come back to full function. Well, if you met them other than maybe some sun damage, you wouldn't even know what happened to them. So it's the same thing, and that's a larger window, right? I always said, like in sport or healthy aging or some other, you can take people for a long window of change of recovery. But when you're around trauma, injury, or surgery, it's a very intense interruption of your natural, what they call homeostasis, your natural balance and functionability. And our goal is to make sure we give it all the supportive nutrients and everything you can do, or the best chance, if you will, of full recovery. So if you think of it this way, when you go into surgery or trauma, your needs increase. So if your intake doesn't increase, there's an imbalance, and you don't have the best outcome of recovery. And the older you get, the more important it is. So,
right. So the body's looking for, obviously the building blocks of the tissue that's damaged, but it also needs more energy because the immune system's working overtime.
Of course.
The risk of infection has gone up. There's a number of things that are happening that just requires overall more energy for the body.
Absolutely. Well, it's also, think about this. You can actually use up to 500 or 50% more calories daily around a surgery or trauma to the body, more than you're eating normally. It doesn't make sense. Like I always would tell patients when I saw them full time, is dieting has no place around surgery. Now that doesn't mean a healthy diet doesn't have a place around surgery, but you need more volume, you need more input, you need more building blocks to aggressively or to supply the needs of the body during this aggressive trauma or interruption that you've had, to give it every chance it has to, every time it needs to do something, it has the tool. Instead of having to rob from Peter to pay Paul to try to get you back to health in a timely and best outcome status or fashion.
So I think that's a really important point, because I think a lot of people assume that, if I'm perhaps, living in the Western world and I'm affluent, I eat 3 meals a day, I eat at good restaurants and what have you, that from a nutritional standpoint, I'm good. I'm fine. A lot of the studies, more recent studies, in fact, there's a very large one done of 16,000 patients by the Journal of Nutrition, showed that actually malnutrition is almost endemic. It's almost like an epidemic in society, and that most of us, not the people that you traditionally think of when you think about malnutrition, sort of this emaciated person, that most of us, in fact, are deficient in certain nutrients. And the point that you've made is that during surgery or trauma or injury, the baseline level of needs that you have actually increase quite significantly. So you need to go above and beyond what you're currently eating.
Well, it's interesting because you'll see me when we've talked a lot. When I look off in the distance, I'm going through this big file box of all the experiences I've had over 40 years of doing this for others at a high level. And in orthopedics, I can't tell you how many really healthy, fit, what you would think is a great potential of a great fast recovery and outcome in orthopedics. It should have been a natural, like a no-brainer, as they call it, of here comes Isaiah, for example, he's going to have a great outcome. And I see one patient constantly when that happens, and she came in and literally I watch down the hall going, she's going to have a great outcome from this surgery. Former Division II athlete, strong natural structure, genetically, exercised, 36, still had some muscularity left. I thought she'd just be a great outcome. Well, unbeknownst to me, she comes back without telling us, and she was gone on a diet because she was afraid of her weight. And she come back, she was on crutches when she should have been walking independently. She was complaining about pain and inflammation, even though she should have had better result than that. Also, PT was painful, which should have been a great outcome or an easy thing for her to do. When I looked at her numbers, as I would do, and see, what she was doing nutritionally and what her intake was, and I saw she lost about 8 pounds of muscle in 10 days.
Wow.
Because she was cutting back her calories so much, she decided to cut all carbs out of her diet and cut back her intake down to a lower calorie because she didn't want to put any weight while she was sitting around with her knee. So she didn't have enough building blocks to not only rebuild what was happening to her, but also keep her from being inflamed and not feeling weak and not feeling, compromised as much as, you can feel when you're undernourished.
Yeah, well, and I relate to that story. And Ken, you know this. I at one point became a fairly serious runner. I still am, not at the level that I was previously, but I was logging very significant miles. And at one point, I got a stress fracture in my foot, and I thought, being a fit guy that generally I think eats very reasonably well, that I'm gonna rebound from this and get back to running pretty quickly. So I was in a boot, and lo and behold, something that typically would have taken 6 to 8 weeks to heal, I'm at the 10-week mark. Losing my mind, still experiencing pain in my foot. So I'm about to go to my podiatrist, does the scans. I still haven't healed. And I was like, what's going on here? And so the first thing just kind of intuitively that came to mind is, am I nutritionally compromised? And that's what you just talked about is, we think we're fit, we think we're healthy. And the reality is, during injury and surgery is the time we really, really need to think about nutrition as one of the primary goals.
Well, it's a science that's understood in certain arenas of the world. Sport, certainly. Tube feeding, believe it or not, in hospitals, they understand the basics of it to make sure someone doesn't waste away a bed and die while they're intubated. They understand calories, they understand amino acids and proteins. It might not be the healthiest stuff sometimes they put in that it's carried in, of sweeteners and sugars and all that, but they do understand. And the interesting thing is when we actually look at those areas to see if there's any cross relationship, right? What nutrients are being used in all arenas. But interesting enough, it doesn't get to the doctor's office until we came along, and it doesn't really get out to the public unless we do podcasts like this. Right. What can you do with all the science that exists today to make sure you're nutritionally optimized, to make sure you have the best outcome from any trauma or any circumstance, or even in the aging process as you get older? If you really take some proactive steps to be disciplined, you can really have really rapid outcomes. I mean, basically what we saw is that if someone really falls in nutritional optimization the way we encourage them now with MEND, but at that point it was just building blocks, you could take off a week or two in the healing process of all ages and health levels sometimes.
Yeah, so that's a great segue, and perhaps we'll kind of end the podcast here, where there's a lot of topics we want to cover with you in subsequent podcasts and leverage just the knowledge that you have. And we'll, for the listeners, look for Ken Roycroft again. We'll be covering additional topics with him. I think it'll be of great interest to you. So in your practice, can you just talk a little bit about how you guys have integrated nutrition into your philosophy and your thinking, and then just how is that translated into results in terms of what you're seeing in your patient outcomes?
Well, initially, when I was brought in, because remember, this is a new frontier, right? It was we haven't seen it done before in orthopedics previously, or at least a model to follow. So initially I'd come in and I would shadow the doctor. Then very quickly, I would go in first and get a nutritional profile on the person and send in a surgical assistant first, give me some data to work with, see if they needed any additional testing or any type of further information. And then counsel them and say, tell me about your day. Tell me, and then sometimes ask them for diet logs or whatever to get information, understand who they are as a person and as a patient. That was the beginning stages. And then we started looking, originally that was only certain procedures. Very quickly, within a month or two, it became every patient, no matter what procedure, no matter what outcome, and no matter what health status. Because we really wanted to encourage them of understanding how this could be the moment that tips the scale for them to get healthier. And really the main issue was we weren't under any false impression that by walking in the office and meeting me in an orthopedics office, they're going to turn into health nuts. It was really just to make sure they had the best outcome, because really that's how people rank a doctor. You know, what I very quickly saw, and I remember shadowing him those first few weeks, I'd walk with him, and you go into an orthopedic office, there'll be like 4 doors or 5 doors, and there are patients behind him. It's like a mystery. You walk in, it's, hi, doctor, and they think he's a genius because they feel great. Or there's a cloud over their head, and they're like, I don't think you did a good job. And it becomes a whole, and I said, wow, you got a really tough job. It's, you never know what you're going to get. I said, what are the success rates? He goes, it's usually about I don't know, 7 or 8 out of 10 is a good result. He goes, and so I ended up tracking that, and it being a 74% out of 10. So I really took it down to numbers. I started asking questions and brought in questionnaires and orthopedic scores and all that. So then we started doing our nutritional intervention, and we were able to get up to 886 or 8.6 out of 10. So we get a 12% gain in satisfaction employee result, because they were having great PT results. They had less pain, less inflammation, better satisfied with the doctor, would recommend the doctor, and they felt they were feeling stronger, and this was a great decision. So fantastic. What else can you say? I mean, that's the measurables in that world, right?
Yeah, and absolutely, Ken, and thank you for sharing that. We're consistently now hearing from, as you know, from our medical partners that nutrition is becoming top of mind for them, and those doctors and surgeons that have implemented this into practice are not only seeing really great patient results, but the feedback that they're getting from patients in terms of just the halo it creates for them on the extra step that doctors are going to encourage and ensure that their patients are getting the best possible results is really having an impact on their reputations and their practice, really. So I want to thank you for the amazing work that you're doing just in practice for patients and helping them to have the best possible outcomes, and everything that you do in health and nutrition, the work that you've done for MEND, and we look forward to spending more time with you on future podcasts to share really valuable information with our listeners and with our MEND customers. So thanks again.